In the shadows of human interaction lies a powerful weapon, a tactic as subtle as it is destructive: the silent treatment. This is not merely a communication guide. Rather, it is a comprehensive exploration of a psychological manipulation tool that wields control over minds and hearts. As you venture through these pages, prepare to uncover the nuances of this pervasive abuse and dismantle the walls it erects. Here you will learn how to reclaim your voice, heal your wounds, and cultivate the emotional strength necessary for robust relationships. Discover the truth behind the silence. You deserve to be heard. Break free, ending the cycle of silent treatment abuse, written and published by Stealth Psychology. Chapter 1: Understanding Silent Treatment Abuse. Imagine walking into your home after a long day, only to be met with a cold silence. Your partner sits on the couch, engrossed in their phone, while you stand there, shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other, unsure of what went wrong. Days blend into weeks of this silent treatment, a suffocating absence of communication that robs you of connection and intimacy. At first, you attribute it to a temporary mood, convincing yourself that the issue will resolve itself. However, as time passes, the silence becomes a looming presence, isolating you and creating an emotional rift that you struggle to bridge. This scenario illustrates a common yet insidious form of psychological manipulation: silent treatment abuse. Many individuals unknowingly find themselves ensnared in this emotional labyrinth, where controlling behavior masquerades as mere misunderstanding or personal space. The true intentions of the manipulator often remain hidden beneath layers of silence, leaving victims bewildered and craving resolution while grappling with feelings of confusion and inadequacy. The silent treatment operates as a potent psychological weapon, aimed squarely at emotional control and compliance. When a manipulator employs this tactic, they are not merely ignoring you. Instead, they are wielding silence as a tool of power. Their ultimate objective is to extract compliance or instill fear, causing you to question your worth and inadvertently submit to their whims. Over time, this behavior erodes your self-esteem, making you more susceptible to their demands and less likely to assert your own needs. It is an emotional minefield where the victim frequently does not grasp the extent of their entrapment until the damage is stark and undeniable. You may find yourself engaged in a frantic internal monologue, desperately trying to decipher what you said or did wrong, endlessly seeking solutions while the manipulator remains shadowy and bolstered by their tactic. Victims of the silent treatment often feel trapped within a cycle of punishment and reconciliation. This manipulation thrives on emotional frailty and vulnerability. When silence reigns, you might begin to reevaluate the health of your relationship, attributing your partner's distance to normal disagreements or stressors. However, this misinterpretation leaves you even more susceptible to future instances of manipulation. Without realizing it, you may accommodate the behavior, accepting silence as a legitimate response to conflict, thereby normalizing what should never have been acceptable. This chilling dynamic can extend beyond personal relationships, infiltrating workplaces and friendships, turning any environment rife for exploitation into one where psychological control quietly thrives. Recognizing silent treatment abuse poses a unique challenge, as the absence of physical aggression or loud arguments results in a form of emotional ambivalence. Victims often find themselves paralyzed, caught in a complex web woven by the blocker who expertly distorts communication, leaving you yearning for resolution while marooned in a sea of silence. Rejecting this manipulation begins with awareness, a stark recognition that silence does more than speak volumes. It deliberately distorts reality and undermines emotional health. Understanding silent treatment abuse allows survivors to shed the weight of their invisible shackles, empowering them to reclaim their narrative and break free from the manipulator's grip. Ignoring this subtle form of control could plunge you deeper into emotional turmoil, where despair masquerades as love and compliance is enforced through a powerful, suffocating silence. Identify the signs, name the patterns, and prepare to embark on a transformative journey, armed with knowledge that fosters resilience and emotional strength in a world that often whispers hidden truths. Silent treatment abuse leaves a profound and often insidious impact on victims' emotions and decision-making processes, perpetuating a cycle of despair that can traverse every facet of their lives. Emotions run high when one experiences the sting of silence. Feelings shift from confusion and anxiety to frustration and ultimately resignation. Victims often find themselves triaging their emotions, negotiating with their own sense of self-worth as they grapple with the suffocating silence imposed by another. The influence of this manipulation can lead to an ongoing internal struggle where anger mingles with self-doubt and the belief that their worthiness fluctuates based on another's approval. Research in psychological science highlights the concept of social exclusion as a significant contributor to adverse emotional states. Studies demonstrate that when individuals feel rejected or ostracized, brain regions associated with physical pain become activated. This suggests that the emotional toll extracted by silent treatment is not merely motivated by feelings of sadness. It triggers genuine physiological responses. Consider the case of Jane, who endured weeks of silent treatment from her partner after a minor disagreement. Initially, she attempted to mend the rift with love and kindness, only to feel more isolated as the days went by. Each unreturned text message and silent dinner amplified her anxiety, culminating in a debilitating sense of hopelessness that eroded her self-esteem. Jane's experience reflects how profound emotional repercussions can distort decision-making, compelling victims to rationalize the behavior of their manipulators in desperate attempts to restore harmony. The ramifications extend to relationships as well. In many instances, silent treatment warrants the unwitting victim to tiptoe around conflicts, surrendering their authentic selves in favor of placating the manipulator's demands. With emotional needs unmet, intimacy takes an irreparable hit, fostering resentment and detachment that ultimately disrupt healthy interaction. A poignant example can be observed in the case of Tom, who remained in a long-standing friendship where one party frequently employed silent treatment to assert dominance. Despite yearning for mutual engagement, Tom found himself questioning his own decisions and compromising his values, leading to an imbalanced relationship that left him emotionally drained. The hesitance to confront what felt inherently unjust further buried any sense of friendship in layers of silent struggle. The subtle charm of silent treatment abuse lies in its dependency on human empathy and love. People often fall prey to this subterfuge because it generates a conflict that teeters on the edge of emotional investment. The psychological pull of wanting to fix things can overpower individuals' judgment, compelling them to believe that enduring silence signifies love or an unwillingness to engage in conflict. It's the human Harvey Wallbanger effect, an inexplicable desire to fight for relationships, even when faced with unhealthy dynamics. The fear of being alone can create an unwitting acceptance of the manipulator's conditioning, transforming emotional dependence into an anchoring point in victims' lives. Recognizing and confronting silent treatment abuse not only serves as a defense mechanism against emotional turmoil, but also prompts necessary and enlightening self-reflection. Often, it is the emotional need for validation and acceptance that leads individuals into the trap of compliance, allowing manipulation to masquerade as affection. Each instance of silent treatment serves as an urgent reminder of the critical necessity for emotional autonomy and awareness, weaving the thread of urgency further into understanding the abuse they face. In the forthcoming sections, we will delve into the hidden warning signs often overlooked, insights that can empower individuals to reclaim agency over their relationships. Recognizing these signs is pivotal for breaking the cycle of manipulation and reclaiming a voice stifled by silence. Join us as we shine a light on the overlooked markers of silent treatment abuse that can transform confusion into clarity and fear into empowerment. Manipulators often employ intricate strategies to identify their targets, carefully analyzing the emotional landscapes of those around them. This keen observation enables them to tailor their tactics, exploiting vulnerabilities and fostering an environment ripe for control. The process usually begins with the manipulator meticulously gauging the emotional responses of others, understanding who will tolerate their abuse and who may challenge their authority. Through casual conversations and keen attention to personal insecurities, they establish a psychological profile, zeroing in on individuals who exude empathy or possess a strong desire for connection. For instance, in a workplace setting, a manipulator might observe a colleague who openly seeks approval and displays a willingness to please. By withholding communication or acknowledging their hard work intermittently, the manipulator can harness the victim's intrinsic need for validation to ensure compliance. This power play creates an insidious dependency that the victim is often oblivious to until it is far too late. The nuances of how these tactics unfold can be seen poignantly in the journey of Lisa, who found herself ensnared in a friendship with someone who had a penchant for the silent treatment. Initially, Lisa felt a magnetic pull towards this friend, captivated by their seemingly vibrant persona. However, as time went on, she noticed her friend would withdraw emotionally during moments of personal inquiry or conflict. For example, when Lisa mustered the courage to confront her friend about their dismissive behavior, silence descended like a heavy fog. Despite the tension, Lisa's friend would eventually re-enter conversations, amplifying Lisa's sense of guilt and obligation. The subtle shift from camaraderie to emotional neglect unfolded gradually, leaving Lisa inside a cycle where reconciliation felt more important than addressing the manipulation directly. Such scenarios are often laced with compulsive dynamics that reinforce the idea that confrontation must be avoided at all costs, a pattern that empowers the manipulative individual while eroding the self-esteem of their target. The psychological shifts occurring during these manipulative encounters are both subtle and profound. As manipulation unfolds, victims may oscillate between confusion and self-blame. Early indicators often manifest as a diminishment of self-confidence, causing the individual to question their values, narratives, and emotional needs. When silence is wielded as a weapon, it adds confusion to the already tumultuous sea of self-doubt, crafting an internal dialogue that pits their desire for communication against the manipulator's demands for withdrawal. This ambivalence silences the victim's voice while cultivating a false sense of obligation to cater to the manipulator's emotional state. Over time, these responses can habitualize into conditioned behaviors, where victims learn to placate and appease the emotional climate, looping them back into compliance. Recognizing these mechanisms is paramount for self-defense against psychological manipulation. By identifying patterns within their experiences, individuals can begin to decipher the often masked boundaries trampled by their manipulator. Arriving at a point where awareness transforms confusion allows victims of silent treatment abuse to distance themselves from emotional entrapment. Understanding that their feelings of guilt, confusion, and obligation are not reflective of reality, but rather manipulative facets of the situation, sets the stage for breaking away from dependency. Knowledge stands as the first bastion of resistance, marking the threshold of empowerment as individuals learn to discern manipulation subtleties. With this understanding, individuals can prepare themselves for the next phase of this journey, one that seeks to uncover how control escalates, leading victims into deeper cycles of dependency and isolation. The power lies not just in recognizing these patterns, but in preparing for the emotional complexities inherent in dismantling them. As we navigate through the intricacies of control, know that each insight you gain is a stride towards liberation, building a foundation to reclaim your emotional strength and autonomy once more. Chapter 2. Reclaiming Your Voice. Imagine a scene where Emma is preparing for a promotion at work. Driven by ambition and hard-earned experience, she is confident and ready to present her ideas, but unbeknownst to her, Daniel, a co-worker with whom she has shared camaraderie, has been silently undermining her for months. The moment she begins to speak during the meeting, Daniel's dismissive body language and haughty demeanor silence her enthusiasm as he interrupts her, subtly redirecting the attention away from Emma while planting the seed of self-doubt within her. In this instance, Daniel's manipulation serves a dual purpose. It promotes his ambition while stifling Emma's potential. The ultimate goal behind psychological manipulation often includes emotional control, social isolation, or compliance, from which manipulators derive power and validation. The tragedy, however, lies in how victims like Emma fail to recognize the weight of their own entrapment until the invisible chains of manipulation hold them tightly in place. Manipulators excel at crafting environments where they can exert influence while maintaining an air of innocence. Their method often relies on sowing seeds of doubt and confusion to weaken their target's resolve. Emma's experience embodies a journey all too common among victims of manipulation, marked by disorientation and a diminishing sense of self-worth. Every condescending remark disguised as humor, every backhanded compliment, works to diminish her voice and reinforce the notion that her contributions are not worthwhile. With these manipulative tactics, the boundaries of acceptable behavior are continually violated, leading victims down a spiral where they become ensnared in a web of self-censorship. The patterns of behavior that manipulators employ are not as visible as one might expect. Emma, caught between her dreams and Daniel's subtle sabotage, reflects the often misunderstood reality of silent treatment abuse. Victims find themselves questioning their instincts, hesitating to assert their needs, and inadvertently becoming compliant in a vicious cycle. The longer they remain silent, driven by the weight of perceived unworthiness, the deeper they sink into emotional isolation. As one navigates moments such as these, the initial recognition of control becomes pivotal. Victims gradually become aware that their needs have taken a back seat to the whims of another. Further complicating the realization is the trauma bond formed through repeated cycles of manipulation and emotional neglect. For many victims, the comfort of clinging to the familiar often trumps the pain inflicted by the manipulator. They begin to feel that any assertion of their voice would disrupt the false sense of stability provided, leading to the misbelief that keeping quiet is synonymous with preserving peace. This misguided belief creates a paradox where victims frequently choose silence over vulnerability, inadvertently handing over their power to the manipulative counterpart. Reclaiming one's voice during such emotional turbulence requires a courageous commitment to understanding its importance. Victims must first acknowledge the unseen warfare they face, recognizing that manipulators deploy psychological tactics to keep them in a state of disempowerment. This journey does not simply begin with asserting oneself. It starts with accepting that every instance of suffering under manipulation deserves recognition and understanding. Each silent acquiescence loaded with unexpressed truths lays the foundation for deeper emotional wounds, making it essential to unpack and dismantle those underlying dynamics. In the upcoming sections, we will delve into the pressing urgency of reclaiming not only your voice, but also your agency in this emotional landscape. By recognizing the steps to assert oneself, you can rewrite your narrative, transforming silence into a powerful proclamation of self-worth, free from the oppressive shadows of psychological manipulation. Prepare to embark on a transformative path toward finding your voice, for in reclaiming it, you hold the power to break free from the chains that bind you. The impact of being silenced within a manipulative relationship reverberates far beyond momentary feelings of frustration. It saturates the emotional, psychological, and relational fabric of individuals' lives. Victims like Emma often find themselves in a harsh emotional landscape where self-doubt flourishes and leads to a fundamental erosion of self-esteem. This emotional degradation manifests itself in altered decision-making processes. When one has been conditioned to question their worth based on another's perspective, their capacity to engage in instinctual judgment becomes clouded. For instance, a person might hesitate in voicing opinions at work, fearing ridicule or dismissal, ultimately stymieing their career progression. Each subordinate decision spins webs around their self-worth, engulfing them in a state of constant acquiescence. Studies in psychology illustrate how psychological manipulation can lead to learned helplessness, a phenomenon where individuals perceive no connection between their actions and the outcomes they face. Seligman's research highlights this inability to escape adverse situations, reinforcing a cycle where victims believe that they must endure silence and self-neglect. In the case of Emma, this learned helplessness emerges as she avoids taking proactive steps to address her professional circumstances, instead conceding to the silence that Daniel imposes. Additionally, The suppression of one's voice and feelings greatly impairs relationships outside the immediate dynamic of manipulation. Friends and family may witness someone transforming over time, withdrawing into themselves as insecurities chip away at their confidence. For instance, Emma may begin missing social engagements, too affected by her inner turmoil to interact freely with her peers. This self-isolation often stems from manicured fears instilled by manipulative relationships. Fear of being judged, fear of being misunderstood, or the deeper discomfort of revealing one's perceived inadequacies. When friends reach out, Emma struggles to articulate her feelings, opting for silence rather than burdening them with her struggles. Understanding why individuals become ensnared in these toxic patterns is essential for recognizing the gravity of the manipulation. Often, the vulnerability lies in the inherent human desire for acceptance, connection, and community. When manipulation simulates care and camaraderie, victims find themselves rationalizing unreasonable behaviors, coaxing themselves into believing that the relationship's positive touches outweigh the negatives. It begins as a minor instance of suppression, but spirals into an identity increasingly defined by a lack of voice manipulation creates. Emma epitomizes this conflict. Upon reflecting on her relationship dynamics, she might feel a conflicting tug of love towards Daniel, while simultaneously recognizing the immense emotional labor she's engaged in out of compliance. Scientific research backs this ripple effect. When individuals endure psychological manipulation, they often layer emotional responses. Love coupled with resentment leaves them further trapped within their own emotional turmoil. Therefore, unraveling this intricate web poses a challenge not only of gaining clarity, but of reclaiming one's independence through empowerment. Each dialogue of indirect suppression must be surfaced and acknowledged. By overcoming these emotional barricades, individuals can foster self-advocacy, reestablish boundaries, and cultivate authentic relationships devoid of manipulation. As we uncover these layers, it is crucial to become astutely aware of the hidden warning signs of manipulation that frequently go unnoticed. The next section will illuminate these subtle indicators, arming you with the knowledge necessary to disengage from these emotionally harmful patterns. Recognizing the early signs of manipulation can serve as the crucial first step toward transforming silence back into an empowering voice, a voice capable of delineating boundaries and instigating change. Prepare to learn how to identify these markers, inching closer to achieving emotional liberation and reclaiming your authentic identity. Manipulators possess an uncanny skill for identifying their targets, employing a blend of observations and psychological insight to discern vulnerabilities within individuals. They often seek out those who display signs of insecurity or a deep yearning for approval, as these traits make for fertile ground in which control can take root. This predatory behavior plays out in various scenarios, illuminating what manipulation looks like in real life. Consider the case of Mark, a charismatic manager who swiftly assesses the emotional landscape of his team members. He lavishes attention on those who exhibit signs of vulnerability, subtly manipulating their desires for recognition and validation to foster dependency. When Mark singles out an employee for praise, it only serves as bait, creating an unspoken obligation for that employee to cater to his whims, whether it's taking on extra tasks or being less vocal in meetings. As the dynamics unfold, it becomes evident how these tactics contribute to establishing power. During a later discussion, Mark might dismiss another employee's idea outright, while simultaneously endorsing a similar suggestion from his favored target. Observations like these will reinforce the notion that voicing opinions is not just discouraged. Rather, it poses a danger to one's standing within the group. This climate of ambiguity and distrust morphs into psychological pressure that tightens its grip with each instance of manipulation. Victims find themselves entrapped in a duality between seeking validation and appeasing the whims of their manipulator. The subtle psychological shifts that seep into victims' mindsets are both insistent and transformative. When one is consistently manipulated, self-doubt burgeons and a pattern emerges. Exuding compliance becomes an instinctual reflex. Mark's employee might initially believe they are being valued for their contributions. However, repetitive experiences of dismissal will deteriorate their self-confidence. The softer tones of compliance begin to evolve into an internal narrative twisted by negative reinforcement, leading them to question the validity of their instincts. Consider another case study. Sarah, a budding entrepreneur who enters a partnership with a persuasive colleague. At first, the partnership brims with enthusiasm, but as they collaborate, her partner begins to reiterate their ideas while sidestepping her contributions. Small acts of sabotage take the form of diverting discussions away from Sarah's suggestions or overshadowing her presence in meetings, displacing her confidence over time. Gradually, Sarah's decision-making ability erodes as she hesitates to challenge her partner, fearing confrontation. The psychological retreat engulfs Sarah in a haze of insecurity, where unspoken feelings of inadequacy whisper loudly, demanding silence rather than assertiveness. Understanding how manipulators identify their targets is crucial in transforming oneself from a victim to an empowered individual capable of self-protection. Patterns emerge unmistakably, showing that emotional manipulation often flourishes in environments where fear and affirmation interplay. Awareness of these dynamics can illuminate the emotional minefield that victims navigate, facilitating recognition of nuances that past experiences have obfuscated. As we traverse this critical terrain of self-defense, it becomes clear that knowledge serves as the first line of resistance against emotional manipulation. By comprehending the tactics manipulators harness, individuals equip themselves with the tools necessary to reclaim their voices and gain clarity in their personal and professional interactions. The realization that the cycles of control can be dismantled lays the groundwork for future exploration. Next, we will delve into the escalation of manipulation, examining how victims become further ensnared and identifying key strategies for breaking free from these destructive patterns. Gaining insight into these tactics propels you forward, paving the way to empower your voice and reclaim your narrative. Chapter 3. Identifying Emotional Manipulation. Picture a scenario in which Mia, an energetic and expressive individual, invites her friends over for a gathering designed to celebrate her recent promotion. Excited, she arranges everything, hoping to share the joy of her achievement. Among her guests is Alex, a longtime friend who exhibits a constant undercurrent of jealousy masked with feigned enthusiasm. Throughout the evening, every time Mia reaches for a compliment, Alex makes sure to divert the topic or undermines Mia's accomplishment with backhanded comments like, "Well, let's hope you can handle the pressure. It's a big step up." As the night rolls on, it becomes increasingly evident that Alex's intentions are grounded in emotional control rather than celebration. The ultimate goal behind this manipulation is rooted in maintaining social dominance, ensuring that Mia's achievements feel insignificant, which in turn fuels Alex's fragile self-esteem. Unfortunately, Mia, absorbed in her excitement, fails to discern the true flavor of the comments until she leaves the gathering with her spirit dampened and enthusiasm stifled. This stealthy form of emotional manipulation often goes unnoticed, as it is wrapped in familiarity, camouflaged as playful banter or concern. Victims frequently brush off certain behaviors, telling themselves that they must be overly sensitive or misreading the situation, which mutes their initial instincts. Mia may reflect on Alex's comments at the end of the night and dismiss them as just friends teasing one another, unaware that she has been cleverly steered into a position that diminishes the significance of her achievements. Emotional manipulation works at a profound level. It distorts an individual's reality, gradually eroding their sense of self-worth and diminishing their capability to articulate their own feelings. The mechanisms of emotional manipulation manifest in various ways that can tighten their grip on victims' lives. As the subtle shifts occur, many struggle to pinpoint the root of their discomfort. Victims often endure bumpy emotional rides, associating their upsets not with the manipulator's behavior, but with personal inadequacies. Consider how Mia's feelings sway between confusion and self-doubt, inundated by Alex's remarks. Her sadness blends with a sense of guilt, leaving her affected by the attack on her confidence and resulting in an environment that fosters emotional turmoil. Research underscores how emotional manipulation frequently employs tactics like gaslighting, making victims feel confused and questioning their validity. According to specialists in the field, these patterns are not merely chance, they are often predictors of deep-rooted control issues. For someone like Mia, who naturally seeks harmony and acceptance, falling prey to such manipulation can catalyze extensive psychological consequences. Victims may navigate a muddled sense of identity as they struggle with distinguishing valid emotions from manipulation. Acknowledging these emotional dynamics is vital for prevention, enabling individuals to reclaim their sense of agency in their interactions with others. Learning to identify manipulation involves observing interactions critically and rallies an innate resolve to uphold personal values without undermining their significance. Equipped with this knowledge, victims can gain clarity moving forward, knowing that there is immense importance in speaking out against emotional subjugation. As we progress into the next part of this journey, we will explore further the tactics manipulators use to entangle their targets and the undercurrents of emotional exploitation that often remain undetected. It is essential to confront these tools with awareness, equipping yourself to decode interactions while empowering your voice. The more we understand emotional manipulation, the closer we get to reclaiming our truth and reclaiming our narratives from the grip of others. As emotional manipulation weaves its intricate web, the resulting impact reverberates across the dimensions of emotion, decision-making, relationships, and self-esteem. When individuals like Mia face the covert devaluation of their achievements, they undergo a profound transformation in how they perceive themselves and their worth. Each instance of being undermined erodes emotional resilience and fosters an unsettling climate of anxiety and self-doubt. The emotional toll leaves individuals feeling confused, yet desperate for validation, often spiraling toward a state where they align their self-worth solely with external opinions. It becomes increasingly difficult to circumnavigate the emotional terrain that manipulators have sculpted, creating an unsettling dependence that clouds decision-making processes. Take, for example, the experience of Matthew, whose colleague Judith consistently downplays his ideas within the team. Initially, Matthew is motivated and eager to contribute, buoyed by the belief that fresh perspectives breathe life into group discussions. However, as Judith discredits his thoughts in subtle yet firm ways, by highlighting flaws or steering conversations to her ideas, Matthew starts to withdraw, second-guessing his intellectual capabilities. This cycles back into inaction. Matthew hesitates to communicate his ideas, fearing dismissal, and finds himself paralyzing creative instincts due to ingrained insecurity. The manipulation not only diminishes his sense of contribution, but also compromises his ability to make proactive choices for his career. Psychologically, this dynamic aligns with the concept of cognitive dissonance, wherein conflicting beliefs create discomfort. Thus, individuals may alter their perceptions to reconcile the differences. Matthew tries to convince himself that Judith means well, redirecting negative sentiments inward. The constant exposure to subtle undermining leads to fragmented self-perception, proliferating feelings of inadequacy that harm not only the individual's confidence, but also the entire team's dynamics. Victims of emotional manipulation frequently remain oblivious to the insidious nature of their plight, a poignant reflection of the human propensity to accept discomfort in familiar patterns. The deep need for social connection or validation can lead individuals to negate their worth, resulting in unhealthy relational balances. Their fears create a barrier to assert their needs or question inconsistent behaviors. The drive to maintain harmony often supersedes the inclination to highlight injustices, luring victims deeper into the emotional quagmire of manipulation. Research in psychology underscores the pervasive impact of emotional manipulation upon relationships. Studies reveal that individuals in emotionally abusive situations experience heightened feelings of isolation, which dampen self-esteem and crystallize dependency on the manipulator for validation. For instance, consider how Mia seeks solace from other friends after the painful gathering with Alex, knowledge of her dependencies increasing with every conversation relayed. However, by continuing to frame her feelings through others' perspectives, she unwittingly undermines her own voice, perhaps reinforcing the sense that she must seek approval externally, extending the cycle of emotional suppression. This complex interplay of emotions raises an urgent call for awareness. Victims must recognize the patterns that leave them vulnerable to manipulation, acknowledging the power dynamics that influence their actions and relationships. Identifying emotional manipulation acts as the opening for dismantling the framework of control imposed by their manipulator. As we delve further into this examination, the next segment will reveal the hidden warning signs that often elude our awareness, marking a transformative moment in understanding emotional intricacies that affect reality. Illuminate these shadowy markers and empower yourself against the encroaching forces of emotional manipulation while reclaiming your rightful voice in the process. The journey to self-awareness is vital, serving as a life raft navigating the murky waters filled with deceptive currents. Manipulators possess a keen ability to identify their targets, strategically assessing emotional vulnerabilities that can be exploited for their own gain. Those who show signs of sensitivity, a strong desire for validation, or a tendency to doubt themselves often become prime candidates for emotional manipulation. Scenarios unfold in which those traits are subtly targeted, reinforcing the manipulator's control. For example, consider Sarah, a dedicated and somewhat introverted employee who works tirelessly to impress her manager, Derek. Recognizing her eagerness for approval, Derek intentionally allocates significant tasks to Sarah while systematically undermining her confidence. He employs backhanded compliments. "You're doing better than I expected," which both acknowledge her efforts and foster self-doubt. Sarah becomes ensnared in a toxic dynamic, feeling obligated to prove her worth while dismissing the implicit suggestions that she is inherently inadequate. Another compelling illustration is Caroline, who finds herself in a friendship marked by emotional volatility. Her friend Lisa often fluctuates between affection and criticism, capitalizing on Caroline's desire for connection. Whenever Caroline shares personal achievements, Lisa's lack of enthusiasm, or even a flip remark like, "Don't get too excited, it's not that impressive," transforms the moment into a tool of control. Each time Caroline expresses herself to Lisa, an unspoken anticipation for validation engulfs her as the fear of sinking back into negativity looms nearby. The emotional push and pull creates uncertainty in Caroline, who begins to tokenize her self-worth through Lisa's praise, correlating her value to the level of acceptance granted by her friend. Throughout these interactions, subtle psychological shifts take root, distorting the victim's perception of reality. Victims begin to internalize the manipulator's narrative as an undeniable truth, crafting an ongoing internal dialogue that amplifies their self-doubt. When Sarah deviates from her texts, she may find her self-esteem diminishing, instinctively fishing for Derek's approval, even when she recognizes his undermining behavior. In Caroline's case, the expectation of Lisa's validation weathers her emotional landscape. By continually seeking acceptance through Lisa, Caroline inadvertently supports the very manipulation that erodes her self-image. This cognitive overhaul alters how victims process interactions and can render them mute when it comes to asserting their own needs. The psychology behind manipulation extends far beyond face value. Individuals often misconstrue kindness, cloaked in condescension, as genuine support. The gaslighting might become so infantile that victims begin perceiving their emotions as erratic or disproportionate. This reality creates a pressing urgency for victims to recognize the deterioration of their own emotional health through manipulation. Even the most intelligent and insightful individuals can find themselves entangled, as emotional fragility feeds into the very narratives they attempt to deny. As insights into these behaviors and their impacts on thoughts, feelings, and relationships crystallize, it becomes imperative to confront each layer of manipulation one encounters. By recognizing the patterns and understanding the mechanisms behind manipulative tactics, victims can commence the process of dismantling this toxic rapport. This knowledge acts as a critical preamble to resistance, arming individuals with the awareness required to reclaim their inner truth and voice. Preparing for the next phase evolves from an understanding of how emotional manipulation escalates over time and plays out in varying degrees of control. Victims may become ensnared in perpetual cycles of emotional turmoil, naively believing they can unravel the complexities by merely appeasing their manipulators. Thus, we will illuminate the signs and steps that mark the journey from entrapment toward liberation, providing a roadmap out of the maze of manipulation. Empowerment begins with recognizing the tactics employed against you, paving the way toward reclaiming autonomy and self-worth from the shadows of emotional exploitation. Chapter 4: Healing from Emotional Wounds. Picture a moment in Sarah's life following her tumultuous time at work. After months of emotional manipulation by her manager, Derek, she finally decides to leave the toxic environment. Yet, rather than feeling liberated, Sarah finds herself weighed down by the emotional residue left behind. She grapples with anxiety, self-doubt, and the lingering belief that her abilities as a professional are diminished. Each night she lies awake, replaying scenarios that build walls around her heart, shrouding her sense of self in a haze of unresolved hurt. The manipulator's ultimate goal was to establish a firm grip over Sarah's self-worth, undermining her to ensure her compliance. Unfortunately, victims like Sarah often fail to recognize the full extent of their entrapment until the emotional wounds have excavated deep roots, affecting their ability to navigate future relationships and career paths. Healing from emotional wounds sown through manipulation is rarely linear. Sarah, like many others, gets caught in an emotional labyrinth where her pain intertwines with memories of invalidation and self-doubt. The scars left by Derek's relentless undermining create an inner dialogue filled with negative affirmations, compelling Sarah to question her competence and the value of her contributions. One evening, after sharing a meal with friends, each supportive and uplifting, Sarah's anxiety spikes when she receives a simple critique about her system of organization. Instead of dismissing the comment or engaging robustly, she internalizes the remark, feeling that it represents the larger context of her failures. The emotionally charged past collides with present interactions, fusing the two realms and rendering her unable to engage healthily. Victims of psychological manipulation often struggle without fully understanding their psychological terrain. Healing involves confronting those wounds, peeling back the layers of shame and inadequacy that suppress their voices. To begin, individuals must acknowledge that their experiences of manipulation were marked by a predatory intention. Just as predators study their prey, manipulators map emotional defensiveness, leveraging that knowledge to hijack assurance and clarity. Sarah's journey toward healing involves seeking to understand her own emotional landscape, recognizing how each encounter was a breadcrumb on the path of emotional exploitation. Furthermore, emotional wounds can sculpt one's worldview, distorting perceptions of relationships and personal agency. Those affected may carry into new experiences a tendency to over-apologize or defer to others, inadvertently perpetuating the cycle of subjugation, elaborate by manipulators. Sarah increasingly doubts her instincts and develops an excessive sensitivity to criticism, intricately weighing others' opinions above her own. Such responses become breadcrumbs, guiding her slipstream into further isolation and anxiety. Psychologically speaking, healing from these experiences correlates with concepts of emotional resilience and self-compassion. Studies demonstrate that individuals who practice self-compassion amidst troubling encounters can ameliorate self-doubt, fostering resilience that aids in recovery. While the manipulator's aim had been to bend Sarah's perception of self, transforming this negative narrative into one of empowerment symbolizes the beginning of healing. To combat the impact of his manipulation, recognizing that her inherent worth does not rely on validation from external sources proves essential. Ultimately, healing is the bridge connecting trauma to the reclamation of true self-worth. Allowing the downtrodden to rise from the shadows manipulation imposes. As we move forward in our exploration, the next section will delve into practical strategies aimed at fostering healing and reclaiming emotional strength. Understanding pathways to recovery and resilience will prepare individuals not only to heal, but also to recognize and dismantle the remnants of manipulation embedded in their emotional landscape. Let this be a journey of intentional reflection, embracing the scars of experience as markings on the path to enlightening freedom. As individuals like Sarah begin the arduous journey of healing from emotional wounds inflicted by manipulation, the effects of those experiences ripple profoundly through their emotional health, decision-making processes, relationships, and self-esteem. Being enmeshed in a manipulative dynamic erects barriers that obstruct emotional clarity, leading victims to experience heightened anxiety, which clouds their judgment. When the kindness previously viewed as supportive morphs into a form of emotional dependence, every decision seems tinged with uncertainty. For Sarah, the echoes of Derek's remarks linger in her mind, triggering excessive caution and self-doubt each time she contemplates sharing her ideas in new collaborations. A simple decision, like participating in a team brainstorm, can feel insurmountable, leaving her paralyzed by apprehension born from past emotional abuse. Real-life case studies illustrate how such trauma shapes the fabric of personal and professional negotiations. Consider Jacob, who has endured years of emotional manipulation from his partner Lisa. Over time, he found himself following her lead in decision-making, habitually sidelining his own desires and preferences in fear of negative repercussions. The profound sense of disengagement led to a gradual erosion of confidence. While Lisa's tactics initially seemed rooted in love and concern, meaning was often laced with threads of control that shackled Jacob, ultimately compromising his autonomy and self-worth. Too often, individuals impose their narratives onto themselves, echoing the voice of the manipulator as a constant reminder of perceived inadequacies. Self-esteem fluctuates dramatically in environments marked by manipulation. Victims begin to tie their self-worth to how well they meet their manipulator's expectations. Jacob's acknowledgement of this fact emerges only after serious introspection. Yet many females and males leave emotionally manipulative relationships clinging to a warped perception of love that degrades their true value. Research in psychological resilience highlights that individuals who internalize negative feedback from manipulative relationships develop a chronic sensitivity to criticism. What's been underscored time and again is the psychological principle that learning new patterns of behavior is essential to breaking these cycles. Recognizing that the toxic commentary received isn't a testament to one's truth, but a strategic attempt by another to exert dominance. People often fall victim due to the comforting disguise that manipulation wears. Self-protection mechanisms kick in, persuading individuals to forge attachments based on love and devotion, thereby failing to acknowledge toxic behaviors masquerading as concern. Sarah, who ultimately attributed her previous emotional silencing to personal shortcomings rather than manipulation, exhibits the tendency to overlook red flags as mere misunderstandings. This diminishes the urgency for victims to address potential emotional exploitation head-on. As healing progresses, it's critical for individuals to redefine their perspectives and untangle their emotions from the remnants of past manipulation. Each acknowledgement of self-worth reestablishes the valid foundation from which true confidence can grow, promoting healthier decision-making processes and fostering the resilience needed for future relationships. Acknowledging and cherishing one's intrinsic value will not only bolster greater clarity in navigating life decisions, but instill a steadfast sense of self that manipulators struggle to erode. Furthermore, resilience rooted in awareness provides the basis for addressing potential future emotional threats. As we move forward, the next section will unveil the hidden warning signs of emotional manipulation that often go unnoticed. Developing an understanding of these subtle yet impactful indicators can order a personal roadmap to recovery and empowerment, transforming the narrative from victimhood back to a position of agency. Embrace this opportunity to recognize the footprints left behind by manipulation, allowing the call to action to redirect your emotional compass toward decisive healing. Manipulators possess a distinctly opportunistic ability to identify and target individuals they can dominate, carefully observing emotional cues and vulnerabilities that signify a person's susceptibility to manipulation. They hone in on those who exhibit signs of insecurity or a need for validation, using psychological insights to tailor their tactics effectively. For example, consider the case of Lisa, a bright and ambitious student who constantly seeks affirmation from her peers. Recognizing this vulnerability, her friend Martin gradually begins to undermine her confidence. Initially, he employs charm by complimenting her work, but contrasts those remarks with critical private feedback, such as, "You usually do better than this. Don't settle for mediocre." Over time, Lisa becomes dependent on Martin's approval, and his manipulation takes shape as a fear-driven compliance that diminishes her individuality. This targeting process often unfolds subtlety. Manipulators embed themselves within the lives of their victims, forging what appears to be a supportive bond. They excel at deciphering emotional weaknesses, naturally gravitating toward individuals who exhibit a fear of rejection, loneliness, or inadequate self-image. By perpetuating a cycle of assurance intertwined with criticism, they enable control over those with a heightened desire for acceptance, like Lisa, who begins to misunderstand critique for genuine guidance. As the emotional climate turns toxic, her attempts to assert herself in her studies or friendships dissipate, leaving her unable to voice her thoughts or feelings effectively. Instead of strengthening her confidence, Martin's manipulative tactics foster a toxic reliance where she assesses her value based on his approval alone. The psychological shifts that manifest during manipulation are not immediate. Rather, they accumulate over time. Lisa may initially feel empowered by Martin's targeted comments, viewing them as a means of encouragement and motivation. However, as the manipulation intensifies, subtle doubts start to creep in, overshadowing her confidence with internalized criticism. The fear of disappointment becomes intertwined with the thrill of approval, creating cognitive dissonance that keeps her entrapped. This shift not only clouds her perception of her abilities, but also limits her decision-making capacity, steering her toward conformity rather than exploration. Real-life studies corroborate that emotional manipulation creates a learned helplessness effect, wherein the individual experiences diminished self-efficacy and grows reluctant to assert autonomy. Research by psychologists such as Martin Seligman emphasizes that consistent exposure to critical or undermining behavior fosters resignation in targets, making them experience a sense of helplessness and inability to effect change in their situations. As time unfolds in Lisa's academic and social spaces, she observes her decision-making retreat into passivity, increasingly prioritizing Martin's opinions over her intrinsic worth. Recognizing manipulation's signatures becomes a vital act of self-preservation. Awareness that manipulators cultivate relationships through emotional bait dramatically changes how an individual might interpret the unspoken hierarchies within their social realm. By honoring one's feelings and breaking through any layers of self-doubt, victims reclaim ownership of their agency and enable resilience. Understanding these tactics and recognizing the emotional undercurrents that shroud them is essential to building defenses against manipulation. This knowledge empowers individuals to disentangle from harmful influences, serving as a tool in the healing arsenal, providing insights into patterns that foster control or exploitation. As we progress to the next section, we will delve into the escalation of control, revealing how victims become entrapped in cycles of emotional manipulation. By illuminating these phases, readers can equip themselves with insights essential not only for self-defense, but for nurturing healthier interactions moving forward. Knowledge acts as a catalyst for transformation, ushering one toward clarity, confidence, and liberation, aid toward reclaiming genuine connections distanced from the shadows of manipulation. Chapter 5. Empowering Yourself with Boundaries. Imagine David, a graphic designer who has spent years working in a fast-paced advertising agency. He has always prided himself on being a team player, but over time, he begins to notice a disturbing pattern. His colleague Rachel frequently requests his help with her projects under the guise of camaraderie. Each time he obliges, she seems grateful. However, David soon realizes that Rachel's demands consistently infringe on his personal time. Rachel subtly manipulates David's sense of obligation, leveraging his desire to be seen as helpful and indispensable. Her ultimate goal is to maintain her own reputation as a high performer while using David as a convenient crutch, inherently shifting the burden of her workload onto him. This back-and-forth dynamic becomes increasingly strained, leaving David overwhelmed and feeling unappreciated. The power struggle in such scenarios often goes unnoticed. as manipulation and control masquerade as benevolence in the workplace and beyond. Victims like David may fail to discern the crunch of emotional exploitation until it has snowballed into an exhausting cycle from which they can barely escape. Each task David completes for Rachel strips away a fraction of his own autonomy, prompting guilt that further entrenches him in unhealthy compliance. The silent boundary violations accumulate, morphing into an emotional burden that impedes not only David's productivity at work, but also his relationships outside of the office. The absence of firm boundaries can incapacitate individuals emotionally. Victims often view their worth as intertwined with their capacity to please others. David's apprehension about asserting his needs stems from a deeply ingrained perception that denying a request would equate to being unhelpful or even selfish. As Rachel's manipulative tactics persist, David becomes enmeshed in a cycle of self-doubt, losing sight of the essential truth. Valuing one's own time and energy is not only valid, it is necessary. Over time, his well-being diminishes while Rachel thrives by taking advantage of his good nature. Research indicates that developing personal boundaries is vital for maintaining emotional health and fostering healthy relationships. Without them, individuals become susceptible to cold-blooded manipulation, which fosters resentment and disillusionment in those who genuinely want to contribute positively to their communities. A celebrated study within psychology illustrates that individuals engaged in self-sacrificial behaviors often experience declines in self-esteem over time, making healthy boundary setting not just important, but imperative for overall well-being. As boundaries take physical and emotional form, the filters through which individuals experience interactions begin to change. David's journey necessitates an exploration into defining and asserting his limits, capabilities that fend off unwarranted emotional exploitation. Understanding classification into needs and expectations illuminates the pathway toward regaining balance in relationships, allowing individuals to express themselves without fear of disapproval or abandonment. While establishing boundaries may invite discomfort initially, it empowers individuals to reclaim their narratives. It fosters resilience steeped in self-awareness, the first step in obliterating the chains that emotional manipulators may insidiously tighten. Gaining clarity on one's limits cultivates confidence and invites respectful interactions based on mutual recognition rather than dominance. In the forthcoming section, we will delve deeper into effective strategies for defining and enforcing boundaries while discussing the untold benefits of living authentically. Journeying through this exploration will not merely strengthen your emotional core, it will illuminate the boundary lines necessary for navigating relationships free from the shadows of manipulation. Embrace the journey of discovery, for true empowerment lies within the ability to delineate your rightful space and establish the terms under which you coexist with others. As individuals like David begin to establish boundaries, they often face a multifaceted battle that reverberates throughout their emotional landscape and decision-making processes. The reality is that manipulation changes how individuals engage in relationships, often distorting their self-esteem in the process. Without well-defined boundaries, victims may inadvertently empower their manipulators, contributing to a cycle that sublimates their needs to those of others. David's experience illustrates how emotional manipulation can create friction not only within oneself, but also in one's interactions with others. When boundaries are lacking, individuals experience heightened anxiety and uncertainty. This emotional turmoil can lead to impaired decision-making, as priorities appear distorted through the lens of others' expectations rather than personal needs. David, for example, continue assisting Rachel even when it infringes on significant aspects of his life outside the workplace. His fear of confrontation morphs into a pressing duty to maintain Rachel's approval, defining his actions through her lens instead of his own. The minute yet persistent erosion of his emotional integrity eventually cultivates regret, deepening the rift between his authentic self and the mask he wears to appease Rachel's demands. Psychological research reinforces the importance of boundaries for both individual and relational health. Studies reveal that individuals lacking boundary awareness are more susceptible to emotional distress, often leading to chronic resentment. The absence of limitations in interpersonal relationships fosters an environment that permits exploitation to thrive, making victims blindly accommodating others at the expense of their own identities. This malleability becomes dangerous. It can pull one further from genuine connections, as evidenced in David's admiration for Rachel that morphs into dependency. Over time, self-worth begins to correlate solely with others' perspectives, constricting the freedom needed to embrace individuality. Real-life case studies illustrate how boundary violations manifest in everyday relationships. Take the case of Emma, who continually catered to her partner Kyle's needs, sacrificing her own passions and interests. Initially driven by love, Emma's accommodating nature soon became unhealthy, compelling her to invalidate her desires and dreams in favor of creating a nurturing environment for Kyle. As her self-esteem faltered, Emma's decisions began to reflect her fears of rejection rather than her aspirations. Each time she prioritized Kyle, she inadvertently reinforced a submissive dynamic that stifled her voice. A troubling realization upon reflection, but one far too common among individuals who lack boundary clarity. Why do individuals fall for this pattern? Often rooted in a longing for acceptance, many sacrifice personal boundaries and autonomy for the approval of others. The unrecognized belief that love involves self-abandonment deepens the emotional quagmire, leading victims into accepting unhealthy dynamics as normal. This phenomenon explains why individuals with strong yet unexamined attachment needs might tolerate relationships devoid of mutual respect, consistently redefining their worth based on external validation. The emotional toll of violating boundaries can grow perilous, chipping away at one's self-perception until feelings of inadequacy mold the foundation of their identity. Yet the recognition of one's right to set boundaries provides a critical breakthrough toward restoring integrity and self-worth. As individuals define what constitutes respectful interactions, they fortify their resilience in relationships, paving the way to reclaim authority over their lives. Moving forward, we will explore the hidden warning signs that permeate relationships, overlooked by many. Equipping oneself with knowledge surrounding these subtle indicators serves as a beacon toward recognizing disallowed emotional debts, empowering you to transition ventures into relationships grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Let this exploration embolden you and prepare the groundwork that allows you to live authentically within your own boundaries, free from the grasp of manipulation. Manipulators often possess a remarkable ability to identify their targets by honing in on specific emotional vulnerabilities. They become adept at examining interpersonal dynamics, discerning which individuals express a need for validation or show signs of insecurity. This insight allows manipulators to craft their interactions to foster dependency, ushering their victims into a cycle of compliance. For instance, take the case of Natalie, a junior employee excited to contribute her innovative ideas at a tech startup. A senior colleague, Tom, competently recognizes her enthusiasm but leverages it to his advantage. He systematically reroutes her ideas into his presentations after subtly eroding her confidence through backhanded compliments. This not only undermines Natalie's potential, but also maintains Tom's dominance within the office hierarchy. Every instance Tom dismisses Natalie's contributions or shifts credit away from her deepens a psychological rift that impacts her self-esteem. Initially, she admires his experience and thus believes his superior status grants him greater authority. Natalie tragically underestimates the extent to which Tom's behavior circumscribes her capabilities, leading her to navigate a path littered with self-doubt. Meanwhile, Tom's behavior exemplifies how manipulators create an environment that encourages others to second-guess their abilities, thereby controlling the narrative and bolstering their self-image by demeaning others, an all-too-common pattern. These subtle psychological shifts can engender a pervasive sense of blame, causing the victim to internalize the analysis that they must change or simply do better. As Natalie finds herself oscillating between self-critique and the compulsion to refine her work to win Tom's approval, she begins losing sight of her strengths. Ultimately, her focus shifts from her objective talents to the need for acceptance within the toxic dynamic. Psychological research underscores the predilection for individuals in emotionally manipulative situations to fall into similar traps. According to experts, victims may develop a sense of cognitive dissonance, justifying manipulative behaviors as normal while simultaneously undermining their self-worth. The internal conflict arises as they reconcile their desire to be part of a team with the burning realization that their contributions are misappropriated. Natalie's dilemma becomes externalized, hindering her ability to speak out when witnessing Tom capitalize on her ideas. Hence, she feels trapped within the circumstances created by another's manipulation. In another instance, consider Alex, a college student striving for acceptance among a group of friends, highlighted by one charismatic figure, Mark. Mark, aware of his power to manipulate perceptions, will initially shower Alex with attention. However, as soon as he senses Alex's emotional investment, he begins to enforce a subtle control over their interactions, often demanding loyalty while issuing negative comments about Alex's social circles. Desperate to maintain Mark's favor, Alex becomes tangled in a web of insecurity and acquiescence, his worth contingent upon Mark's validation, defining a friendship on uneven ground. Understanding the tactics employed by emotional manipulators marks a crucial step toward self-defense. Individuals must learn to recognize how manipulative behaviors infiltrate relationship dynamics, while fostering an environment where self-worth and boundaries can thrive. Ultimately, awareness becomes empowering. When individuals grasp their right to resiliency and agency, they stop acquiescing to such toxic patterns and instead forge healthier, more balanced relationships. The transition to the next section prepares individuals for a deeper inquiry into the escalation of control, from psychological manipulation to emotional entrapment. By unveiling these dynamics, we can equip ourselves with the knowledge necessary to understand and recognize the telltale signs that are indicative of manipulation, thereby reinforcing our commitment to building fulfilling connections free from the chains of emotional exploitation. Embrace this journey of discovery. It's the key to unlocking true emotional freedom. Chapter 6. Cultivating Healthy Relationships. Consider the experience of Emily, a woman who enters a new friendship with Daniel, a charming individual with a persona that draws her in. At first, Daniel appears attentive and supportive, always ready to listen to Emily's thoughts and concerns. However, as their friendship deepens, Emily begins to notice a foundational shift. Daniel frequently insists on dictating where they go, whom they see, and even how Emily engages with her family. Underneath this facade of care lies a manipulative strategy driven by the desire for control. Daniel's ultimate goal becomes clear: to isolate Emily socially while maintaining an illusion of companionship. Thus, he molds her into a version of herself that endorses his narrative, stifling her autonomy and ambitions in the process. As the dynamic unfolds, what started as a seemingly benign friendship begins to distort Emily's perception of healthy relationships. Each time Daniel dismisses a suggestion she makes or overrides her preferences with his own choices, the invisible shackles of manipulation tighten. Emily becomes ensnared in Daniel's web of control, as his charm masks his deeper intention. Meanwhile, she convinces herself that this level of attention constitutes genuine care, an all too common rationalization among those caught in compelling manipulative cycles. Such cognitive dissonance often keeps victims from appreciating the alarming transformations taking hold of their social lives, until it's far too late. This scenario illustrates a broader phenomenon where individuals fail to recognize the subtleties of emotional manipulation in their relationships. Many may initially perceive such interactions as normal expressions of affection or concern, ignoring the underlying currents of isolation and control. As Emily experiences these shifts in her connection with Daniel, she becomes increasingly hesitant to challenge his decisions or question his intentions. The gradual erosion of her self-determination in favor of compliance leads her to disregard her own needs while permitting Daniel's dominance. In doing so, the seeds of resentment begin to root deeply within her, camouflaged by fear of losing the very connection she once valued. This navigational strife through coercive dynamics ties neatly to psychological read. Studies show that victims can gradually lose sight of their desires and passions. Researchers posit that manipulative relationships foster environments promoting compliance and silence, inadvertently nurturing emotional weakness. Emily may look back at her past interactions with Daniel and acknowledge small misgivings, but often concludes those were just flukes, dismissing the broader implications of allowing someone else to dictate the rhythm of her life. Cultivating healthy relationships often necessitates recognizing this manipulation. Individuals must develop tools to discern invasion of their own personal space. Anchoring oneself in self-awareness while establishing firm boundaries becomes paramount for avoiding the pitfalls of emotional control. Fostering resilient connections hinges on mutual respect, and every relationship should fundamentally experimentership with equal standing. Underlying manipulative chemistry can grant a one-sided perspective, distorting authenticity, leading victims down unclear paths filled with anxiety and doubt. Understanding these constructs fosters clarity and detachment from toxic connections. As individuals like Emily learn to cultivate healthy relationships marked by respect and open communication, they bolster the very fabric of their emotional well-being. Recognizing the value of asserting one's own needs is the pivotal shift needed to transcend deceptive dynamics. In the next part of this exploration, we will delve into practical approaches to establish and maintain healthy boundaries within our relationships. This foundational knowledge prepares individuals to break free from the grip of emotional manipulation, empowering them to reclaim agency over their personal interactions. Embrace the journey toward recognizing and nurturing healthy relationships, for they serve as vital localizations in a life adorned with respect, compassion, and authenticity. As individuals navigate emotional manipulation within relationships, the impact on emotions, decision-making, and self-esteem can be profound and destructive. The subtle and calculated nature of manipulation slowly reshapes individuals' perceptions of themselves and their world, leading to a gradual deterioration of confidence and clarity. Take, for example, the case of Emily, who, after becoming entangled with Daniel, finds solace only in his approval. Each forced decision he dictates sows confusion in her mind, inducing a clouded grasp of her own desires. As she begins to relinquish her agency, her emotional landscape fills with anxiety and uncertainty, forcing her to weigh Daniel's preferences above her thoughts. Research suggests that emotional manipulation effectively employs intimidation and coercion to achieve compliance. As individuals like Emily experience such approaches, they often internalize feelings of inadequacy, impacting their ability to voice their opinions or assert their needs. Psychological studies conducted on relationship dynamics show that when subjected to emotional strains, individuals become more compliant, frequently avoiding confrontation or questioning the motives of their partners out of fear of rejection or conflict. In Emily's case, she starts to believe that any challenge to Daniel's preferences could jeopardize their budding friendship, compelling her to remain passive in situations where her voice should matter. The impact extends upon her self-esteem, causing diminishment over time. As Emily acquiesces to Daniel's desires, the internal narrative shifts from one of empowerment, where her ambitions and dreams take precedence, to a cycle marked by unworthiness and subservience. This transformation is insidious. What may have started as an enthusiastic partnership turns into a script where only Daniel's needs are satisfied. Each time she disregards her preferences, a wedge further deepens between her authentic self and the persona she adopts in his presence, leaving her grappling with growing feelings of despair and resentment. Moreover, manipulation in relationships can have consequences on broader social connections. Emily finds herself increasingly isolated from friends and family, who may voice their concerns regarding her attachment to Daniel. As he maintains indirect control over her decisions, Emily drifts away from those who stimulate and validate her independent identity. The psychological damage experienced in such instances cultivates an environment bathed in alienation, making it easier for manipulators to exert their influence without skepticism. This tendency to overlook manipulative behavior often stems from individuals' intrinsic desire for connection and acceptance. Many victims may innately fear abandonment or withdrawal of affection, interpreting control as a sign of commitment rather than a red flag. As a result, they remain trapped, hindered from scrutinizing behaviors that contradict true mutual respect. Emily's experience serves as a crucial reminder that self-preservation requires vigilance and discernment. Without fully recognizing the red flags associated with emotional manipulation, the cycle can perpetuate indefinitely, perpetuating self-doubt and relational discord. Establishing healthy relationships necessitates a conscious understanding of self-worth and a commitment to fostering an environment of mutual respect and open communication. Recognizing the manifestation of manipulation is vital for dismantling the internalized narratives that distract from one's authentic self. Healthy boundaries and acknowledgement of individual preferences must prevail in cultivating sustainable connections, where both parties contribute equally. With this understanding comes an urgency to learn the hidden warning signs often glossed over in relationships. Recognizing these markers can be the pivotal first step toward asserting control over one's interactions, ultimately stopping the cycle of emotional manipulation in its tracks. As we transition into the next section, we will shed light on these critical red flags, empowering individuals to embrace healthier relationships that nurture growth rather than foster dependency. Embrace this journey of discovery. It holds the keys to cultivating genuine connections defined by respect, trust, and autonomy. Manipulators are often skilled at identifying their targets, carefully observing behavioral and emotional signs that signal vulnerability. This strategic observation does not happen randomly. It involves honing in on individuals who may exhibit a consistent need for approval, a lack of self-confidence, or emotional sensitivity. For instance, let's examine the case of Mia, an empathetic young woman who craves connection amid her recent relocation to a new city. When she encounters Greg, a charismatic individual who seems genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings, she finds solace in his attention. While this initial bond feels comforting, Greg is merely laying the groundwork for manipulation by establishing himself as someone who understands her current emotional vulnerability. Throughout their interaction, Greg employs calculated charm while subtly positioning himself as the sole source of support in Mia's life. Almost instinctively, he begins to undermine her other relationships. He reframes her friendship with a supportive colleague into an issue of loyalty, suggesting, "Are you sure she's really looking out for your best interests?" This strategic suggestion isolates Mia, encouraging her to lean more heavily on Greg, thereby reinforcing the emotional bond that serves his agenda. This tactical isolation evokes profound psychological shifts in Mia as her sense of identity becomes increasingly tethered to Greg's influence. As the manipulation escalates, any hesitation to affirm his views or comply with his requests triggers trepidation within her, fueling a belief that disagreement may jeopardize their connection. Initially, Mia may convince herself that Greg's protective tendencies reflect genuine concern for her well-being. However, the intention behind his actions starkly contrasts the caring exterior he presents. Mia heads into a downward spiral, gradually foreboding self-doubt that redefines her interpersonal assessments and influences the way she engages with others. Research reveals that manipulation thrives on the nuanced interplay of emotional dependence and fears. Victims regularly fall prey to their inherent human needs for approval, belonging, and love. Greg's psychological maneuvers capitalize on this vulnerability. The more he restricts Mia's engagement with friends, the more her emotional investment in their bond deepens, creating a vicious feedback loop. Over time, her self-esteem deteriorates, leading to a dependency on Greg's opinions, a step that relinquishes her autonomy and silences any remnants of her independent spirit. Another poignant example can be seen in the relationship between Tom and his friend Mark. Mark excels at leveraging Tom's admiration for his intelligence, often discarding Tom's contributions during discussions while pretending to nurture his growth. As meetings ensue, Mark will offhandedly say things like, "Don't worry, you'll get better at this," sowing seeds of doubt in Tom's mind. This manipulation not only influences Tom's decision-making, but also coaxes emotional strain into their friendship, convincing him that Mark's condescending demeanor stems from a place of care. The psychological implications of being preyed upon extend deeply into victims' sense of self-worth. With every relational slight, the acknowledgement of self-determination fades, and individuals grapple with emotional baggage that shrouds their identity in uncertainty. Understanding these manipulative behaviors is crucial. Recognizing the early signs of such patterns can go a long way toward preserving emotional health and independence. Embracing knowledge of manipulation equips individuals like Mia and Tom to wrest control back from their manipulators. Detecting these emotional tactics fosters resilience when navigating their relationships, while combating isolation arising from unwanted influence. By exposing these tendencies as the first step against emotional entrapment, individuals arm themselves with the clarity required to foster healthier dynamics in their future relationships. In this journey through emotional manipulation, we have explored the intricacies of recognizing, confronting, and ultimately overcoming manipulative dynamics in our relationships. From understanding silent treatment abuse to establishing empowering boundaries, we've dissected the psychological tactics used by manipulators to undermine self-esteem and autonomy. By cultivating healthy relationships founded on mutual respect and open communication, you are now equipped to reclaim your narrative and foster genuine connections. Thank you for joining us on this transformative exploration. We encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe to Stealth Psychology for more insightful content that empowers your journey toward emotional well-being.